the Harvard Graduate School of Education, working at the nexus of practice, policy, and research.
The sort of points that we want to raise in today's session really, I think, can be summarized in this, which was the subtitle, if you like, of our title. We're in a time of mass migration. We have a huge amount of migration worldwide, not just in the US. And juggling multiple identities is a challenge for vulnerable young newcomers and the host community alike. And the questions that we will be trying to address this evening are: how can educators facilitate positive management of both these rich and these daunting opportunities? And what are the risks involved for all concerned? Now, our speakers, we had in fact 4 speakers, but unfortunately, Fayez Magal was unwell and was unable to join us. But I will read a short summary of some of the things he's going to say in the session. But the 3 speakers who are here, Liav Orgad, raise your hand, yes, Jocelyn Stanton, and Geraldine Mandy. And I will introduce them in more detail before they do their presentations. Now, the format will be that they will give short presentations of about 10 minutes, and then we will have a kind of chat discussion, like a roundtable discussion on the panel, hopefully provocative and lively, and then we'll open up for the last 20 minutes or so to the audience for you to contribute and ask questions and say provocative things, complain, object, whatever. And if you're going to speak there, we will ask you to come to the microphones to speak at the microphone, and it will be helpful if you do that to say who you are. This is the event is being recorded for archive purposes, and so it's important that we capture everything that's said on the AV. Now, the purpose of the forum, as I indicated, was to be summarized in those 3 points I put up earlier. But this is a wider question, a wider issue or mission, if you like, as well. Incorporating newcomer youth into schools successfully is obviously a primary educational concern in the USA and in many other countries. And our main educational concern might seem to be: should we treat such young people? How should we help them to fit into life in our country? And how can we ensure that the host population in our schools knows how to welcome such newcomers and to avoid discrimination and exclusionary behavior? And we can also recognize that newcomers are struggling with new identities, and that as educators we can help, and we have an important role in helping them do so. But this is also more widely a civic issue. How any nation treats its newcomers, whatever the reason for their immigration to the country, and what's expected of them in terms of how to become a citizen of that country, this all reflects also how that nation thinks about its own national identity, and how to preserve it against threats, and how it can and should go, how far it can and should go in requiring newcomers to adopt that identity. And these entail legal and moral issues as well as civic issues. So in the forum, we're not only asking questions about managing newcomers in our United States schools, we're also talking about how nations generally, not just the USA, negotiate the way that national identity is constructed, how it's reproduced, and perhaps also how it's imposed on newcomers. And we therefore have invited people who can take a broad perspective on these issues. So, our first speaker is Liav Orgad. Would like to come and up shortly. Liav is currently professor at the Rajina School of Law in the Interdisciplinary Center, or IDC, in Herzliya in Israel. He's a member of the Israeli Commission on Immigration Law and Policy. He did graduate studies at Columbia Law School, and he has been a visiting scholar at Harvard Law School. And he's currently writing a book entitled Cultural Defense of Nations, Liberal Democracy and Cultural Citizenship. So we welcome, please, Liav.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you, Ellen, for the kind introduction. It is often said...
Sorry, would you move me off just a minute? Yeah, I think you have to move. Oh, yes.
Oh,
Right.
no, it's fine. So it is often said that immigration poses a threat to national identity, and that preserving national identity is essential to sustaining a society. So from here, some people conclude that we need to educate the immigrants and making them like us. And naturalization requirements, and in particular citizenship tests and integration courses, are a great platform to think of these issues, not only because, and to build on your point, Helen, because they reveal who we think we are, what is our national identity, but also because they demonstrate what we would like other people to think we are, and what kind of nation we would like to be. So in my presentation, my question would be how to educate first-generation immigrants, and I will present 3 case studies from Europe, Germany, the Netherlands, and the UK, and then discuss some implications regarding the United States and show some risks involved in immigrant education. So case number 1. In 2007, the Netherlands has passed a new and a revolutionary citizenship law, which, unlike most other countries, doesn't see citizenship as something that can be gained by learning. It's not like a bar exam that you can learn how to be Dutch. So the Dutch new philosophy is one cannot study to be Dutch, one has to feel Dutch. But then the question becomes, what does it mean to feel Dutch? How can we test it? So the Dutch new law asks every person wishing to enter the Netherlands on a non-visitor visa to go to the Dutch embassy in his or her country of origin, and then to participate in integration courses and to take some language lessons. Again, the whole process is taken from abroad. And at the end, to pass 2 tests, which are very difficult tests, about the language, the Dutch language, and the Dutch society. But this is not enough. The applicant must also sign a contract, which is a real contract with the government, that he accepts, again, accepts, he or she, the Dutch values, and will not challenge them while in the country. And at the embassy, the applicant must watch a film, which is the film about the Dutch society, which is a very peculiar film because it's a 1-hour film about the Dutch society and includes many details about the Netherlands, but it also includes detail about the Dutch culture. And while watching the film, the applicant reaction are tested, and you would better like what he sees. It's, again, taking at the embassy. So one of the things there, which was very controversial, and is still very controversial, was it was about a topless woman, teenager, swimming, or homosexual kissing. And there is no exemption for a religious scholar, like a Jewish rabbi, who needs to watch this and at the end sign that he accepts these values and you will not challenge them. So what the Dutch case teaches us, I think, is that it is a concept in which the Netherlands try to impose Dutch identity on newcomers and make them like these identities, these values, and have faith in them. Case number 2, Germany. In 2005, the German state Baden-Württemberg adopted a new policy under which every person asking to become a German citizen must go through a burdensome process of, again, some cultural requirement that one needed to be tested on. So to become German, the applicant, the newcomer, must show loyalty to the German way of life. But what does it mean, German way of life? Nobody really knows. But we can learn about this concept from reading the questions, again, in the citizenship test, the new test in Germany, which asks, basically it's a morality test. It examines the person, the applicant's moral perception and psychological attitude towards sex and sexuality and children education and conversion, freedom of religion. Let me give you just 3 examples out of 30. So there are 30 questions in the test. So it goes like that. Imagine that your adult son comes to you and declares that he is a homosexual and would like to live with another man. How would you react? What is your opinion of the practice that parents force their children to marry? Your spouse would like to dress like other German women or swim naked. Would you try to prevent it? If yes, by which means? Case number 3. In 2004, in the United Kingdom, the Home Office decided that every person asking to become British must prove that he or she has become British. So first, it was necessary to decide what Britishness means. So the Home Office actually established a special committee to investigate the concept of Britishness. What does it mean, British, to be British? And to be British, the committee says, is, and I quote, to respect British institutions, values, beliefs, and traditions. But what are these values and traditions? So again, nobody really knows, but the Home Office because the Home Office has not yet found a solid concept of Britishness, but in 2007, it adopted a new citizenship test, which is the Life in the UK test, that every newcomer must take. So the Life in the UK test is an interesting case. It doesn't ask any questions about British history or British culture. Well, it does ask some questions about culture, but more about the popular culture. And daily, so there are questions about rugby and cricket and the Notting Hill Carnival, or horse racing, or things like that, or how to buy a ticket to the underground. So one of the questions there in the test goes like that. You spill someone's beer in a bar. What usually happens next? But again, this is not enough. In 2010, just a few months ago, the Home Office has adopted a new policy, which is in addition to all these processes. And under this policy, to be British means some British activities. So there are some British behavior that the immigrant must fulfill in the road, in the fate to British citizenship. So there is a new status. This is actually reinventing immigration law, because there is no such a status, at least there was not such a status before, called probationary citizenship. And during the probationary period, the applicant must show a minimum period of time of paying taxes or active participation in the British society. So what these cases teach us? I think that they demonstrate a wide spectrum of option of creating citizens out of immigrants. And what are the implications with regard to the United States? So the United States has no clear citizenship philosophy. I mean, there are some current American law has some naturalization requirement, which you can see here. The applicant must show that he doesn't have any criminal record, and basic knowledge in English, and basic knowledge and understanding of US history and civics. And the most important factor is to be attached to the principle of the Constitution. So it's all about the Constitution. It's a process of, if you want to call it a constitutional conversion. The applicant has to show some, not emotional connection, but some attachment to some principle of the US Constitution. In 1997, the US Commission on Immigration was not satisfied with this situation, and it called for a reform on the concept of creating new Americans. And what it basically said is that we need to rethink the whole idea of how one can become an American citizen. And it recommended some steps that should need to be taken. But these days, the issue is again discussed in Congress. And I think that some of the questions that will probably be discussed is, first, what Americanism means. Is it a kind of, is it a process of integration, assimilation, maybe conformity? If conformity to what values, what culture, whose culture? Second, what is the center of America's citizenship? Is it about the so-called American way of life, maybe the American culture, or maybe the US Constitution? So in Britain, again, they ask a lot of questions about sports, and there is no question about Shakespeare. But think about it. Let's think for a moment. What are if we have to choose three basic values or principles that are so American that we can say that immigrant must share them in order to become an American citizen. And this is not an easy question. And the third question is what level of attachment we should require from the immigrant. Is it just acceptance of our values, or just knowledge, which is less tricky level, or maybe identification? They need to show some emotional connection to some values. The process of immigrant education raises some serious risks, and I would like to mention just three of them. So first is the principle of state neutrality. I guess that we don't have to adopt a radical version of state neutrality in order to conclude that there are some things that state should be left out of this discussion. So consider the British question about spilling a beer in a bar. So let me just mention the answers. So A, the possible answer to this question are: A, you would offer to buy the person another beer. B, you would offer to dry his wet shirt with your own. And C, you may need to prepare for a fight in the car park. Do you know what the right answer is? Take a guess. A. So there is a right answer to this question, and the right answer is A, even though one may choose B and ask what is morally or legally wrong with this answer. But my point is more fundamental. My point is, why is the British government interested in private interaction in a bar? This is something that, as long as the activity, the reaction to such an act is legal, should be left to the private sphere. I'm finishing. Second is cultural coercion. I think that another risk is the Kantian distinction between respect and obey and adhere or identified with. And so the former are legal commitment, and the latter are moral obligations. And I think that only the first should be involved in the process of immigrant education, which is more about the law. We should educate them what is lawful or unlawful, and not to ask for some identification. And the third concern is ideological exclusion, which I believe that some integration courses, at least in Europe, undermine the value and the importance of principle of diversity and multiculturalism, because they impose one identity of one dominant group, and they create an image of a one-to-one correlation between the state culture and the majority culture, which are not the same. So just to conclude, immigrants, we all know, are not coming alone. They travel with their culture and identity and dress code and language and attitude towards sex and sexuality. And the great challenge here is how can nation state preserve their national culture and at the same time refrain from violating the same values they seek to protect. Thank you.
Thank you, Liev. I don't know what it is British either, actually, and I should do. Our next speaker is Jocelyn Stanton. Jocelyn is a senior program associate at Facing History and Ourselves. She has extensive experience in teaching English as a second language and working in schools with high immigrant populations in the United States, Morocco, and most recently in South Africa. In South Africa, she had a Fulbright scholarship looking at how the history of apartheid is being taught in contemporary secondary schools in South Africa. Jocelyn did her graduate studies at the University of Berkeley, California. So.
Thanks for having me. How do I switch this back? Thanks. So I see some familiar faces in the room, and I want to just acknowledge that I'm taking us from a very global, interesting government perspective to a very local, one classroom perspective. And I know many of you could probably be up here doing this talk as well, because many of you are teaching the same students that I've taught in the same cities that I've taught in. And so I'm just representing all of you. So thanks for having me. My experiences are really as a teacher trying to help my students, and all my students, juggle their identity development. Adolescents, as we know, are going through many different identity crises, no matter where they come from and how long they've been in our schools and in our country. And this is not a new phenomenon for newcomers. It's not a new phenomenon for adolescents. In addition, I think our country has always been a country of changing identities. And it's not new that we have immigrants coming to this country, and it's not new that we're struggling to figure out what to do about it and how to integrate and how to understand each other. I think when we emphasize the newness, it becomes scary and different. But I think it's important to realize that our country has always struggled and questioned and celebrated issues around membership. And who gets membership keeps changing, but the fact that we keep having these questions is really a consistent a theme of our country since we started. I mean, that's really where we were born, so I want to just kind of acknowledge that. But with that said, I do think that teachers have some particular strategies and can use different strategies to kind of address the issues in their classrooms and with their students, and especially with newcomers who definitely have often extra challenges and extra identities to juggle. I was thinking just about students. I'm just going to share some anecdotes because that's really, I think, the most powerful perspective is to think about students and what they're going through. And I think about a student that I had in San Francisco from El Salvador, and he came to me at age 18. He was living with a brother who was probably 20. He was supporting himself 40 hours a week, working, and he was coming to school every day, and he was very quiet, and he was very shy, and he didn't say much, and he didn't reveal much. And day after day, just sort of kind of waited for him to start talking, knowing that he had this whole life as an adult outside of my school, trying to keep rent in San Francisco, trying to keep a job. And finally, I was doing similes one day, and he finally raised his hand to share, and he said, I have a simile. And he said, when I speak English, I feel like a baby learning to talk. And I could just like see the sadness in his face, and I thought, that's what he's struggling with. I mean, all of us kind of, I bet, can remember being 16, 17, 18, we have so much to say, we feel so profound, and then to be stuck in a place where we don't have language to share it with people around us, especially if we come from a language group that's not highly represented in our country. We don't know who to turn to. I think that's a huge issue for students that I've encountered. Another story that I think of that illustrates, I think, a mistake that I have often made as a teacher is a student named Vince. And this is sort of a sad story, but one of my first year teaching in San Francisco, the second week of school was September 11th, and we started school. Obviously, we're at a different time zone, so we started school. We knew some things had happened on the East Coast, and it wasn't really clear, and as things became more clear, the district decided to shut down the school, and we needed to send all the kids home, but we had to wait for parental permission. So here I am, this new teacher stuck in a classroom with 30 kids waiting for every one of the kids to get permission to go home. So we're just sitting there looking at each other. What are we going to do? We're in this huge crisis. And this one kid kind of comes up to me, and he just had arrived 2 weeks before from the Philippines. And he said, Miss Stanton, I need to talk to you. I said, okay, Vince, Vince, talk. He said, Miss Stanton, I know who did this. I said, you don't know who did this. It's okay. You don't know no one knows who did this. He said, no, I know who did this. I said, you don't know who did this, and I know it's scary, and I know it's hard, but I promise you don't know who did this. And he said, I do. I know who did this, and we left to escape this, and they've already found us. And in that moment, I said, no, they're not coming for you. Of course they're not coming for me. This is not about you, Vince. It's not about your family. We're fine. We're going to be okay. But what I later sort of had to get my head around was, you know what? He had life experience that I'd never had. He had experienced terrorism. He was right. He did know basically what was going on in a way that I wasn't ready to understand because I hadn't had that life experience. And I had no space in my framework to sort of get my head around that and to honor that experience, to hear it. I think that's a sort of a painful metaphor for what teachers often do, that we don't think about the huge, vast life experience that most immigrants, newcomers, bring to our classrooms. They've endured many different issues that we may not be able to understand, and have many different perspectives that we're not ready to kind of integrate into our own psyches, and how do teachers make room for that. In addition, it shows another really common identity crisis, which is just utter disappointment. many students have come to this country thinking they're going to escape things in their past, things, family strife, poor education, poverty, violence, and they get here and they're like, wait a minute, this isn't that different. Some things are better, but I'm seeing a lot of the same things. And just the disillusionment and the sort of crisis that can internally accompany that. I'm going to tell some good stories because I know that I don't want to have downers on the whole thing. I think of a student named Bat who came to us from Mongolia and was a shepherd in Mongolia and spent his days herding sheep. And because of some teachers kind of noticed he sort of perked up in biology class, even though he was still kind of trying to figure out the vocabulary, they kept feeding him new activities, and as he would stay after school to do more lab experiments, they kept doing different things with him, and just sort of noticed that, you know what, A, he didn't have much to do after school, and B, he seemed kind of interested. And he became this amazing scientist. He's now getting a PhD in San Francisco State. And when I did an activity with my students about identity, and we took empty picture frames and framed the parts of ourselves that we thought were most American, he framed his brain. And he said, I never knew I had this until I got here. And just thinking of the power of teachers kind of realizing that something was growing and letting him explore it. And because I work for Facing History and because I believe in it so strongly, I really want to end just by sharing one other student perspective. And this student is someone from Boston. And he, I think what Facing History does in classrooms really well is it gives students language to understand their identity development and their life and their communities. And how do I make choices, and who am I, and what's this world around me, and how do I make sense of it? And this student kind of talks about his journey. I won't show the whole clip, but just his journey of becoming, kind of using language to understand himself and to figure out who he is. So I'll let him talk, and then I'll sit down. All right.
October 1st, 1989 was the day when I first opened my eyes to the world. In the capital city, Islamabad, Pakistan. I lived in Pakistan for 15 years with my grandmother and my younger sister, Alina. Through my childhood, one of the biggest challenges I faced was the absence of my parents. I was 2 years old when my mom passed away during the birth of my sister, and my dad moved to Dubai and then to the United States. 3 years ago, I moved to the United States with the hopes of becoming someone important. Before moving to the US, I was a different person than who I am today. As a child without the guidance of my parents, my attitude towards my education wasn't serious. School was just another activity in my daily schedule. Instead of focusing on my studies, my focus was on playing cricket and flying kites on hot, sunny days. When I arrived in the US, I was a shy boy who didn't have enough inspiration to take the lead or prove myself as a good leader. 3 years ago, I didn't speak English very much. I was scared of taking risks. That was until I was accepted to Boston International High School. At Boston International High School, I found many connections between myself and other students. During my first year at Boston International High School, I was introduced to Facing History and Ourselves classes by my teacher at the time, Miss Bell. At first, I thought that Facing History is just a random history class. But after taking this class for 3 years in a row, I discovered what it means to face history and myself. The lessons I have learned from my Facing History courses that has had the most impact on me is the idea of personal universe of obligation. When I first learned this phrase, there were only few people in my universe of obligation: my family, friends, teachers, and the people I knew. But as I learned about the Holocaust and the genocide of Rwanda, my universe of obligation began to expand. In each history, we learned about the choices people made. I decided that the choices I made in my life matters. I'm responsible for these choices. After learning about terms like bystander, upstander, victim, perpetrator, and universe of obligation, I think differently about my own choices and have a language to be able to express myself. This year, my classmates and I made movies that presented examples of the phrase moral dilemma, one of the main vocabulary word and phrase that we learned in our facing history class. In the movie that I made, the moral dilemma I addressed was the question of whether or not I was obligated to include Pakistan in my universe of obligation. I kept asking myself, as a citizen of Pakistan living in this country obligated to my country of origin, as fighting and chaos erupted in Pakistan and I saw and heard about it in the news, I wondered if I should include Pakistan in my universe of obligation. After making the movie, I concluded that Pakistan was just the beginning. Instead, I realized that my universe of obligation includes everyone, in my class, in my community, and in the world. These are...
Thanks.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Well, we now move to our third speaker, who is in many ways an example of the kind of things that Jocelyn is describing. Geraldine Mandy is now a student at Brandeis, but she comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which she left at the age of 16. She returned very briefly to the Congo in 2009, and she'll say a little bit about this when she tells us about her experiences. She arrived in this country speaking no English, but within a very few years she became extremely competent in English, as you will hear when she speaks. But particularly also, she was a winner of an Oprah Winfrey Prize, a national essay competition, with an essay that she wrote on Elie Wiesel's book, Night. She is studying international global studies and African and Afro-American studies in Brandeis University, and she's very involved in activities and concerns around Africa. Welcome, Geraldine. She can tell us her story of being a newcomer.
Good evening. I'm just going to read you my story. My name is Geraldine Mandy, a junior at Brandeis University, double majoring in African and Afro-American Studies and International Global Studies with a minor in French. I plan to pursue my master's after finishing at Brandeis, possibly in business with an international focus. I am also very interested in humanitarian intervention in third world countries. I was born and grew up in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, one of Africa's most war-torn countries, until age 16. Thereafter, my family moved to Cameroon for a short while, as the American embassy was closed in the Congo. We had hopes of saving up enough to make it to the United States. In 2004, we finally were able to make the move, settling in Brookline. Before I moved to the United States in 2004, the US represented everything to me. My mother, my aunts, my cousins, and my uncles all lived in the US. If you're familiar with the African culture, we tend to focus a lot on extended family. For my parents, we had to leave the Congo no matter what. They felt that we could have a better education and future. They were even ready to risk their own lives to make it happen. Looking at pictures my mother would send back to us in the Congo, I was dying with the envy to go to the US. Even the buildings and colors seemed to glow with freedom and opportunity. When 9/11 happened, my family was shocked and scared that something had happened to our family in America and that it might be sent back because the people who had attacked the buildings were not Americans. What would this mean for America's nation of immigrants? I have always envisioned using my education to one day help my brothers and sisters in Africa. and believe constructing better societies culminates in applying the tenets of hard work and careful planning. Through growing up abroad, I was fortunate enough to learn 3 languages fluently: French, English, and Lingala. Life in the Congo was a bittersweet experience. While I was instilled the values of disciplined work at a young age, there was a great struggle of my people that required such determination. Life changes quickly when war and disaster and the general well-being of a nation. In Congo, studying my classes was countered by watching my city die. Hunger meant something truly horrifying, and government-enforced curfew kept citizens on edge. Hospitals were always lacking, and when people were injured, presented great challenge. Vaccines were non-existent in some areas, and disease would spread fast with no public health system. Perhaps the most traumatizing day of my life was watching my friend die from a stray bullet that hit him in the city. I was 9 years old then. Then there was the drawn-out fear of my father being in the Congolese army and refusing to fight the war because my mother was very sick at the time. There was no one to take care of my 9 siblings and me. The government was and still very corrupt, so human rights were not protected as they are in the US. We finally made it to America. My siblings and I were ready to start our new life, especially excited for school. I was scared at the time because I did not speak a word of English. I was relieved to learn that I was in a class that taught English to students from other countries, so I was not alone. However, this did not take away from the fact that I had to take other courses with everyone, at least begin to socialize with new friends. School felt overwhelming, and while some students welcomed me, others totally rejected me. Despite enjoying my chance at a better education, there are startling experiences I will never forget. Like in my chemistry class, one of the students asked me if all Africa was a jungle and if I lived and played with lions and tigers. Or in English class, a student refused to be in the same group with me because I did not speak English up to her standards. She asked me why we immigrants come to America. The most absurd thing I have ever heard was someone speculate that we in Africa live in the jungle naked and that we're given clothes at the airport. It's interesting to also note that my mother had the same experiences. Then one day in high school, a teacher approached me junior year about the Oprah essay contest on Elie Wiesel's masterpiece Night. I was reluctant and nervous, but wanted to do my very best. I could compare his work with my own experiences growing up in the Congo. After all, both millions, Jews and Congolese, had lost their lives to genocide. To my amazement, I was one of the 50 winners chosen out of the 50,000. My most hurtful that day was when one of my best friends told me that I was only picked by Oprah because of my life in the Congo, stripping me of all that I had learned in my home country. Some people assume because of your background alone you get anything you want. If they only knew the struggle my people made to find a life here in the US, and the price so many immigrants pay trying to survive in the US, leaving places like the Congo. If they only knew moments like the day I watched my friends die. Nonetheless, this wonderful contest paved the way for me to go to Brandeis University in a perfect storm of charity, luck, and relentless hard work. Now, 3 years later, I find myself in a dual major and a member in the Student Organization Student Support Services Program, and am one of the presidents of the group representing this organization, the Student Leadership Board. Within this group, I am able to be a member to many underclassmen. I love the United States, and I feel that despite my hardships and discrimination now and again, the doors are open to everyone. I feel American in the sense that I pay tax, and I know if even America's founding forefathers were immigrants themselves when creating our Constitution. If my rights are violated, I can sue just like anyone else. A big part of me is Congolese, and I will always be Congolese, but I recognize that I may be thrown into the stereotype of just another African, as if we are one homogeneous group. Africa, a place with over 2,000 ethnic groups and hundreds of dialects spoken. I was disheartened when I visited the Congo for the first time this past December. My friends and family there told me to never go back. They told me that they are trying to get at too, that I should not go there to visit them. They said I spoke with an accent now. I was confused and angry when I came back. I walk a fine line between being a Congolese woman from Africa and immigrant to America. And every day I live with this dualism, and I promise it is not easy. But it is worth it. My future is here now, and I am proud of how far I have come since moving here to the US. But I know this only is a taste of what I can do. I hope one day my work will make a noise so loud in America it reaches Africa.
Well, thank you very much, Geraldine. I find Geraldine's story enormously uplifting. I'm sure all of you do. And best of luck in achieving your ambitions. Our final speaker would have been Fayez Mughal, but as I explained, he was unwell and couldn't come. But he was going to make some very important points, which I'd like to contribute to the discussion. So I'll read a small section of the summary he sent me of what he was going to say. By the way, he is the founder and director of an organization called Faith Matters, which is an interfaith organization concerned with community development in Britain. So I will read just briefly some of the main points that he was going to make to us today, and you will see they are a darker side, perhaps, of the immigration and the newcomer issue. In the past 20 years, the number of refugees and asylum seekers in the UK has grown considerably, and I would add, of course, it's true internationally as well. The backlash against Muslims after the Salman Rushdie affair in the late 1980s changed the focus on attacks on asylum seekers increasingly into an anti-Muslim, xenophobic position, which of course was heightened by the US event of 9/11 and the British event of 7/7 a few years later, and was also ramped up by strongly nationalistic tabloid press in the UK, and of course elsewhere in Europe, I'm adding. Anti-Muslim rhetoric and a deep xenophobic vein increasingly run through communities in the UK. Some political groups have suggested that testing the Britishness of people. Failure means deportation, and this is not a test of Britishness of the sort that a moderately benign test of Britishness that Liab was talking about. These are asking for a much more rigid test of Britishness, followed by deportation if you fail. Yet increasingly, this right-wing rhetoric is being played out through community policies, which emphasize that all communities come together in community building. That sounds like something we could all sign up to. However, when it's also linked to integration of certain communities, the question then has to be asked as to why some of the most integrated communities are the most xenophobic and prejudiced. The question that Fayez leaves us with, is it about integration, or is it about having equal life chances to things like resources and unemployment, housing, etc.? In other words, what Fayez is doing is problematizing and raising questions about the word integration. Is integration what we are looking for in welcoming newcomers, or is equal opportunities and equal chances something somewhat different? So with these 4 points, these 4 different positions from very different speakers with very different experiences, we now move to the discussion section, in which I'm going to provoke my fellow panelists with a number of questions, and they have promised to be provoked. So I think the first question I'd like, is the microphone? Yes. The first question I'd like to ask my panelists, which I think it does arise from what's been said, is what are we actually educating for when we talk about the education of newcomers? And a corollary of that too is not only what we're educating for, but who are we actually educating? Who would like to start with commenting on that? And
I can start.
Geraldine, yes.
One thing that usually amazes me is, like you talked, is the questions that they ask people when they're trying to naturalize different people come here with different reasons, and they come here with different experiences. Some people come here as immigrants, and some people come here as refugees. People who come here as immigrants, usually they have the means to come here. And people who come here as refugees, a number of them don't have the means to make it here. So when they get here, all of them just get thrown to this one categorization of naturalization, and that becomes a problem. If you try to educate them the same, it's a huge problem for a person as a refugee who's just trying to bring food on the table, and you tell this person you have to learn about the Constitution and the people who funded these countries, and I just don't see how this is going to help this person to flourish in this country.
I just want to add, can you hear me? So I'm wondering what is the purpose of all these processes of immigrant education, and we might think of different purposes. So one purpose, and this is especially the case in some European states, is that we have no purpose except of we would like to use these courses and education programs in order to deter immigrants from coming, because we would like to control the scale and the volume and the quantity and the quality of the immigrants. A second possible purpose could be to promote social cohesion, community cohesion, because we think that sharing some values and identities would help to sustain the societies, to preserve the state. A third purpose could be to promote active civic participation, active participation in the society, based on the premise that some knowledge and understanding of history and civics and maybe the US Constitution is necessary to participate in the society and to be part of the job market. A fourth possible purpose could be education. We really believe that there is core element of identity, of America's identity, that you cannot become an American citizen without having this knowledge. And then the question becomes, what is the knowledge? This is what I was trying to demonstrate, that the immigrants are forcing us to think of our national identity, and the way we defined us is reflected in the citizenship test, because it is really what we would like to think we are. Before I came to the conference, I went to visit my family in New York, and one of the people there was a teacher in a high school. Then I always ask people, what is the most important element of, the most important thing of being an American? And he said, well, they must know something. He's teaching American literature, and he said they must know something about Robert Frost and Emerson. Maybe, but we might have different purposes, and the question is, the question of the purpose, I think it's a very critical question, but I'm not sure I have the answer, and we might have different purposes in different states and with regard to different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
This is my 2 cents.
Do you want to say anything, Jocelyn, on this? Or? Yeah. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about these tests of successfully understanding the culture is that in many cases the immigrant ends up knowing an awful lot more of rather arcane knowledge than the native people. For example, I'm sure the more British newcomers know the rules of cricket than some people like myself who live there do. So I was asking who we're educating, but you answered in terms really of educating the newcomers. But do you think that we have a different role, or different purpose, or different need to educate the host community? We tend to talk about education in the context of immigration, really in the education, as you say, of people who are coming to the country to make them effective members of that country. But what is our role in educating the native population, as it were? Is that the other side of the coin?
So there is a question. It's a good question, because I think that one possible justification for the citizenship test exists when we ask the newcomers to know what we already know. So it's a substitute for education, right? We have said that the native they were born here and educated here, and the immigrants were not. And this is the reason that why we're asking them all these questions. But I agree with you that most of the natives, and we can see some survey on this issue, they don't know these questions. They don't know the answer to these questions. So in Germany, they ask some questions about Kant and symphonies of Beethoven. The immigrants really need to quote some symphonies of Nietzsche, Schiller. And I'm almost sure that if you, I don't have the test here, but there is a new naturalization test in the United States from 2008. Take a look, just Google it tonight and take a look at the test. And I think it's a peculiar test because if we give this test to some high school students, I'm not sure if they will know the answer. And this fact, empirical finding, raises the question whether the test is justified from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And this is your point, that we are asking them something which most of the people here are not familiar with.
Somehow we think we ought to know, we don't, so we inflict on the newcomers the sort of exposing the ignorance that in fact we have in our own about our own culture, inside our own culture. I suppose I was also asking, though, it's something that comes up in Geraldine's point, is, and also in what Jocelyn was saying, that the people who are receiving newcomers, the native population, surely they need to learn something also, not about their own country, but to learn something about how to manage immigration, how to manage newcomers, because we surely need to educate our young people to be open to a much more diverse and complex society than perhaps they expected to grow up with. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would mainly reiterate my point that I think so much of this is students learning the history of our country. I mean, to learn this isn't a new phenomenon, that immigration has consistently been a huge part of our American identity, I think does wonders to sort of dispel the idea that this is new and scary and is going to threaten us. In fact, it would threaten us if it stopped. It would completely change what our country has become. So I think absolutely that students who have lived in this country for some time need as much education. I think a lot of issues is membership and thinking of ideas of we and they, and who am I excluding and why am I excluding them and who am I stereotyping and why am I thinking of them in this way. I think our students need to really slow down and think about how they're treating groups in their communities and in their classrooms, and anyone needs to do that. We have a lot of pretty quick stereotypes in this country. When someone has an accent, we don't often wait patiently to understand what they're trying to say, students and adults alike, and even slowing students down to think about that, and what am I doing, and what's that about, and why am I excluding that person from communicating with me? Why don't I care what they have to say? Those little things are huge in a high school classroom.
Well, my experience, I had a great experience being at Brookline High School. I had wonderful teachers, and one of the teachers is actually Jocelyn Friends, and they both worked for Facing History. So I had a wonderful experience. They all knew that I came from the Congo, and they helped me when I needed help with my essays. They stayed 10 minutes after class explaining me, or my chemistry class, they even for an hour. And I just think that teachers could make a difference, and if they could also tell like the students, this is a newcomer and you guys need to welcome her or him, that would make a difference.
One thing that strikes me actually, particularly from Fayez's comment, but also reading the newspapers every day, is that things are getting worse rather than better in some ways. I mean, we are facing a much more of a threat to the liberal values we've perhaps taken for granted for the last 2 or 3 decades, both in Europe and in the States. And I'm wondering, for a long time we've had this ideal of multiculturalism and managing diversity, and which had certain implications for managing the process of education, both of immigrant groups and of people who lived here. But I wonder if we are finding that our ideals of multiculturalism are being challenged by these events. I mean, I know that one of the responses to Islamophobia in Europe is to say, well, we can't just say they're right-wing, xenophobic, authoritarian racists. We have to say, well, what is going on when quite large numbers of people in European countries and also here are responding so negatively to Muslims and to Islamic issues generally? Is it enough to say, to preach tolerance, to preach those liberal virtues, or do we have to do something else? I mean, is multiculturalism, as we've understood it, actually going to work in the way we thought it was going to work 20 years ago? Or have we got to rethink the multicultural ideal and multicultural processes? It's a difficult question, but I think you're equipped to answer it in different ways.
Well, I just wonder, what does it mean to have it work? What does that look like? You know,
Okay,
is that
what do
my
you think?
I know I'm just kind of throwing that out. I think that's part of the discussion is what I think it means to look like to work might be different than what you think. And, you know, I think that's part of the question.
Well, have a go at saying what you think it is, what you think it would be to work.
Well, let me think. I mean, I feel like I'm just going to keep repeating myself if I keep talking about history, but
That's okay.
you know, give me a minute. Let me.
Can I add
Yes,
something?
yeah, John, yes.
I think there is an interesting point here, because you see, these old process of citizenship tests and courses and integration courses, they force us to think of what is an American, what does it mean to be Dutch, but they also force us to define and to identify what does it mean, what does it to be a non-Dutch values or un-American. So in a way, un-Dutch is defined some like all these Muslim practices, but I think it's also un-Dutch to exclude them, because the principle of diversity and multiculturalism is a Dutch value. So if you would like to be Dutch or to be British, then you have to respect diversity and multiculturalism. And the point here is that you have to choose either to tolerate, in a way, illiberal practices of these communities, or, and this is my view, to turn into illiberal means in order to liberate the illiberal. And either choice, I think, undermines liberalism, because when you choose illiberal means in order to liberate the illiberal, it is in itself illiberal.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but...
So for you, multiculturalism is recognizing the paradox of liberalism, is it?
That's right.
And living with it.
That's right. I would support more room for multiculturalism and diversity and cultural diversity, and not to have this image of one people, one group, one language, one dress code, culture, and because people are not the same.
Yes, one of the things that I think you are a lawyer, and so you're asking a question from what we should be doing from a legal point of view. But I'm also interested that what Fayez is talking about in summary I read, and I think what other people have hinted at, is that when we are encountering people who are, in your sense, illiberal from whatever perspective, they are actually scared. I mean, this kind of fear of even if it's heightened by the tabloid press, which it certainly is, there is a deep fear that people have, and telling people they ought to be nice Dutchmen or nice Brits or whatever, or nice Americans, doesn't necessarily overcome the problem of people's deep anxieties that lead to these xenophobic responses.
But what is the source of these anxieties? I mean, what they are afraid of. So I agree that if there is a threat to liberal values, to the very basic liberal idea, then it might be more justified to use these courses and tests. But is this really the issue here? I mean, take the Dutch case, for example. So they have the sexual openness and nudism and homosexuality and as the Dutch values. But is it really the core of liberalism to protect these values anyway, anyhow, without no exemption? So I would say that yes, I agree, we need to protect liberal values and to educate immigrants to share these values. But first, I'm not sure that this is the case, at least in Europe, that they are protecting liberalism. And second, I would say that even within the liberal discourse, liberalism also, or at least should allow a person to choose not to be liberal. So as long as the person's behavior is legal and democratic, there is no obligation to be liberal, I think.
an interesting question. Do you want to contribute? Come back to that, Jocelyn, now.
I mean, I think there are a lot of tensions when you allow basic freedoms. I mean, it's not easy. None of this stuff is easy. And of course, we can't expect that we're going to agree with everyone's values in our country. I mean, it would make freedom of religion, freedom of expression completely like a moot point. So I think, I mean, some of the issues that Europe is struggling with, I think we're struggling with in different ways here. I think what we try and teach in our classrooms is that my freedom is inextricably bound up to your freedom, and that I need to preserve my freedoms and your freedom so I can preserve my freedoms. And I think that's what we try and teach with Facing History and try and teach in our classrooms.
Do you want to add anything, Gerald?
Yes, I think that it's going to be hard in the United States in the sense that the United States is made up of different kind of people. We have African American, we have Africans who are coming, and we have Native American. It's made up of different kind of people. And the new thing that we have here in the United States, where you can just stop anyone on the street and ask for identification, how can you tell that this person is legal and this person is illegal? And I don't know if I would ever be asked to show my ID, because I could pass for an African American. Is an African American illegal? You know, I just don't know how we can go on with these things here in America. It's very, very hard.
Mm-hmm. I suppose I have one more question, and I want to throw it open to the audience. What do you actually see as the greatest threat to our role as educators in a multicultural society, a society which wants to help newcomers to become members of a diverse society, not necessarily integrated into the American way? I mean, do you see a future threat coming on the horizon? Do you see things getting worse, or do you see things getting better in the longer term? And what might we as educators do about it? Some people see it as people see a dark future, and I'm wondering if you see a dark future or a positive future.
Well, I think one of the threats is language that we use, and I think when we use words even like threat, that's dangerous. I think of my grandfather, and I remember when we went to war with Iraq, I said he had lived through genocide, he had lived through deaths of 2 wives, he had lived through a death of a child, he had been through many different things, and I said, Opa, is there anything to hope for? What do you think, what's going to happen to the world? Is it going to get, is it just, are we losing everything? And he said, the world has survived more than this. Like, we're going to be okay. The world's going to continue, and this is going to work out. And I think we can get so caught up in the tensions today that we just sort of feel so hopeless, and almost feeling hopeless is also a threat, because then we just sort of say, well, we have to start legislating what you're allowed to believe, what you're allowed to wear, and I think it's dangerous. I think we need to have a bigger perspective and realize that this is a long-standing part of our country, speaking in American terms, and it's not easy. It's not an easy place to be, but it's never boring, and I think we're doing okay. I think there's always things that are arising. There's always conflict, but I think I think if we give up, that's going to be a real change for us.
Are you doing okay, Geraldine?
I don't have anything to add.
Don't add to that. Are you doing okay?
Yeah, well, I just agree that with your point about the language, we should better use a different terminology, and I would say a challenge instead of threat. Okay. But I think that when you read all these books in Europe, Europe Last Day, or When Europe Slept, Huntington Cultural Clash. So I would say that we should first ask ourselves what exactly we're afraid of, and then based on that to discuss whether there is a threat, what kind of threat, what is the the severeness of the threat, and what are the legitimate and illegitimate means in order to cope with this so-called threat.
I think, of course, we've got different meanings of the word threat here. When the books you're talking about, the title of threat there is the perceived threat of some other. When I was using the word threat, I meant the threat to liberal values and tolerance and a multicultural society, not the threat of some people out there who were perceived mythically or otherwise to be a threat to culture. I think it's time to bring it over to the audience. I think I hope you've been stimulated by this. If you'd like to come to the microphone, if you'd like to say who you are, if it's relevant where you come from, and we can either take individual questions and respond to them, or we can take a selection of questions and then respond collectively to them. Who'd like to start?
Hello. Okay. My name is Sam Kim. I'm a grad student here at the Howard Grad School of Education. My background, I'm from Germany. I know I don't look German. My parents are from Korea, so I'm an immigrant, second generation. One of the things that was striking to me is maybe there's a need to differentiate between what kind of immigrants we're talking about, because there's a very different experience between immigrants who come from different parts of the country to Germany. So the experience of Turkish immigrants versus Korean immigrants is very different.
Turkish and?
Turkish immigrants.
And
and Korean immigrants.
Korean.
It's very different. For example, the citizenship test is you don't have to take it if you have gone through German school. So if you have gone through German school, you don't have to take it and you can become a German citizen. There are other factors as well that you need to consider. Also, if you are a second generation and you were born in Germany of immigrants, then you can, after 8 years living in Germany, become a German citizen. In talking about the issue of multiculturalism, and as educators, us being here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, I'm just wondering in how much we prepare as well teachers. It's one thing to talk about this, but in terms of practicality, what do we actually do here in a school like this in order to prepare our teachers? I was a middle school teacher in Dorchester, and I taught Latin American immigrants. And I was wondering myself, what in my teacher preparation, what did I learn about how to deal with these kind of issues? And this may be a kind of provocative, but I think a forum like this, as good as it is not enough. We need more. And perhaps we could maybe have a discussion about what can we do actually practically to help newcomers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to comment, or should I move to the next person? Perhaps? Yeah.
Do you want to go back?
Next person. Yes, come. Yes, next person, please. Yes.
I have a question that maybe all.
Who are you?
Oh, sorry. My name is Ryan Gilbert. I'm a local college guy from the UMass school system. I am interested in, for all three maybe of the speakers to comment, but especially the young lady on the end, and to all the teachers in the crowd, this probably gets you thinking, like as the gentleman was just saying. Teachers have an inherent advantage when we talk about shaping the future, creating a vision of, I'll use the phrase that my friend in the middle said, social cohesion. It's a very interesting phrase that you guys had started to talk about. And the inherent advantage teachers have, of course, is you're working with the youth. You're working with people anywhere from college age to high school age to middle school age and younger, but especially middle school and high school that we know every student to some degree has these identity crisis, let alone being an immigrant or lacking the language or the nationality or understanding of the culture or different religions of where they live. They already, just from their age alone, are at this this very difficult time in their life. And so what I wonder, and what I think is important for everybody to consider, is how to take advantage of kind of that fire inside the youth that you had kind of brought to light in so many of your anecdotes. That Geraldine, what you had said, that single day in your life, what really that could have made or broke how you had spent the next few years of your future was that teacher approaching you. So teachers have a role where they can fill in the gaps of dealing with social issues and social justice that these students may not be getting in their families, especially immigrant families where the parents themselves are probably struggling just as much as the students. So I wonder how we can take advantage, and what your thoughts are on how to take advantage of the energy and that major identity crisis that is in so many high school students nationwide, especially, I'm speaking especially to the immigrant high school population, because I myself run a nonprofit working with inner city youth around Massachusetts, and I find that the biggest thing that draws them together is being so hungry for knowing about the difficulties of their culture. And maybe a Dominican boy doesn't, know so much coming here at a young age as Dominican and wanting to know more, or recently coming here from the Dominican, not knowing about other Latin American nationalities and their struggles. But eventually, I see all these different kids from so many different backgrounds quickly uniting. I see example of this social cohesion you guys talked about earlier. And so I wonder, what could we do practically, pragmatically in our schools to go ahead and maybe after school workshops or different things we can do to go ahead and take advantage of that? Because everything I think we're hoping for dealing with immigrant issues, we can capitalize on so much, especially in a country like the United States. And instead of letting it turn into a struggle and the challenge of dealing with, immigration, let it be the fortunate, this precious chance we have for, I guess, diversity and really human social capital.
Thank you, Ryan. I think we'll save up. So you asked a very good question. I think we'll save it up so that you can answer this with other questions about the end. You had a question, did you? Yes.
I think it kind of goes along.
Sorry, who are you?
Samuel. I'm here at the Graduate School of Education student, master's student. And I guess I kind of even question the word educate and help immigrant as they come to this country. What does that mean? I think as soon as we use the word a need to educate or a need to help, we're assuming, I think, a relationship that is one directional and that is kind of one above the other. And so I wonder, when we talk about those citizenship tests, which I think are mostly based on the need to kind of filter and determine what's good for this nation state, the economy of a state, instead of saying how can they qualify and assume that people have to prove themselves, how can we change the conversation to those tests or those moments to be about what do they bring, not what do you care and what do you have to prove to come here, but what do you bring to the conversation? And therefore not to look at education or help, but rather dialogue, because I would argue that it's not just the immigrants that need to be educated, it's all of us. Right. And I think, as you beautifully point out, that's through dialogue and through sharing those kind of common points that we have in our lives.
Thank you, Sam. You had a question, yes.
Hi, my name is Alice. I'm from Zambia. I'm a master's student here. So I also had a very interesting immigration experience, which and the person who was here to the United States and the person who was interviewing me actually asked really inappropriate sexual questions, which I wondered then after that if that happened to other immigrants as well, and if that is a general thing, or maybe even just a little bit if they use their position of power to kind of get other information. But anyway, my question is kind of piggybacking on some other comments people have mentioned about how do you address the local person who, if I am an American, even in South Africa, about 2 years ago, there was xenophobia riots there. If I am a local South African, I'm an American, I'm struggling in my own country, and then you come and you are getting these jobs that I can get, or you're going to these schools that I can go to. How do you address that individual or that family on that level? Does that make sense? Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam?
Hi, Adam Strom from Facing History. One of the things I've been thinking about is just how when the rhetoric is so inflamed, how can we help as educators help kids make sense of what's going on in the languages? We talked about it, and Fiaz mentioned it in his remarks. What they're seeing in a newspaper literally on the way to school, that the parents are going to share in the tube or on the subway. And so how do you help kids who are going to school every day make sense of it? I'm talking about kids who are the subject of the controversy, as well as kind of kids who are in that host society, because the language is there and it's so easily ducked. And when it's ducked, it just continues as if it's accepted. So I'm interested in how do we take these opportunities?
Okay, thank you, Adam. You have to speak.
My name is Josh. I'm from the Divinity School here. And my question is particularly directed at the fellow in the middle. Is that
Liav, yes.
Liav, yeah. So I guess one of the things that's come up recently is sort of this idea that that we shouldn't use words like threat, or we should try to stay away from words like threat and maybe use words like challenge, or words that are less sort of troublesome. But the thing that I think about actually is the possibility of there being a threat, right? And I guess what my mind goes to is actually thinking about Israel, which is where you work and where you're from. It seems to me that that's a liberal society, or at least historically, it's been a liberal society, and it's having to deal with major, a lot of questions, a lot of people coming and asking, people with different illiberal views, giving trouble to it, and there's a major question for me, and at least in the larger discourse of what will happen there, and I wonder if you could, address that. What is the nature of that threat or challenge, or how does that, how do you deal with that? Because I guess my sense is sometimes there is a threat, but maybe you see it differently, and so I'd love to hear how you think about that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you very much. Any more questions, or shall I ask the panelists to respond? Yes, come on more.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm a master's student here at the Grad School of Education. Last week, I went to my first naturalization ceremony. I saw 29 immigrants get naturalized, and the language really struck me that they that they make them repeat, including I'm giving up my allegiance to any foreign prince, and I'm ready to bear arms for the U.S. And it seemed so strong and didn't sound at all like integration to me. It sounded more like this idea of assimilating and conformity. And Sam mentioned as well in Germany how now the new citizenship law is that after 8 years you can become a German citizen if you're the child of an immigrant. Another aspect of that, though, is that at 23 you have to decide if you have another citizenship which one you want to keep. And in the U.S., my mom is a German citizen. She's been living here for over 30 years. She can't receive American citizenship unless she gives up her German citizenship, which she's not willing to do. And it seems to come back to this idea of loyalty and not having dual loyalties. And I understand it a little bit more in the European context because I feel like the cultures have been there so much longer. In the American context, this idea of a melting pot or a land of immigrants, it surprises me that we're so resistant to this idea of being transnational and that having two citizenships would mean that you're less American. I'm a dual citizen of Germany and the U.S., but I grew up here, and I don't think I'm any less American than any other American that I know. So we didn't talk at all about, I don't know if this is a question, but we didn't talk at all about dual citizenship at the panel, and I was just hoping you could maybe address this idea of loyalties.
Thank you very much. I think it's now time to turn to the various panelists. I hope you've had time to think about some responses. You don't have to answer all the questions, not all at once tonight, but if each of you would like to take a few minutes to reflect on some of the things that we've been asked or heard discussed, and then we'll close. Well, who would like to start? Do you want to start?
I can start.
Geraldine, yes.
I would like to, I don't remember your name. You talked about xenophobia in South Africa. Well, if we go back in the history of South Africa, there has been apartheid and the division of whites and blacks. So blacks did not really have the opportunities. I mean, only a few of them had the opportunity to go to school and learn and become an important person in the future and make a living for themselves. So we have many right now in South Africa, not so many, there are a number of educated blacks, but there's still a great disparity between blacks and whites. Whites constitute 1% of the population, but they're still controlling the wealth of the country, whereas there are many black people, they have power now, we have a black president in South Africa, but they're not controlling the wealth of the country. So that disparities, it's creating xenophobia.